bask in its own achievement. It has a tendency to
materialistic.
fall in love with its own creations, you know? Whereas Pisces is less self-absorbed. Like even if Pisces creates something brilliant up here, they can still get down on themselves because they have more existential dread than a Capricorn does, generally speaking, you know? So you can have a style, you know, of Pisces in the 10th house that is very different. Like, let's say you don't have any other planets. You don't have any planets in Pisces. Let's say you're very Capricorn heavy, and Capricorn's in your 8th house. And let's say your sun is, you have like a stellium in Leo. Now, Leo and Pisces are in a quincunx aspect. They're in different elements and in different modalities, so they have a hard time understanding each other, right? So if you have a stellium in Leo and your midheaven is in Pisces, all your Leo bits are going to be very visible because Leo kind of likes to be the center of attention, has a big lion's mane, you know, and is very expressive and social. And Pisces is expressive but not so social. But it really has very little in common because they're in different elements, they're made of different stuff, different modalities, so they're serving different roles in what they do. So your midheaven just may kind of get lost. You may not know what to do with your career or how to aim your purpose because you have so much grounding you in the things of Leo, you know? And so, yeah, again, that's where the aspects come in, and that's why I place so much emphasis. I like to say, and this is debatable, note this disclaimer: the views, information, opinions expressed during this program are solely the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the city of Cottonwood and its employees. Prioritization, when you're reading a birth chart, I'm leaving the whole rulership talk out of this equation, but for the most part, aspects, houses, rulership stuff kind of deserves its own talk, but I tend to place the most emphasis on aspects and chart shapes, and where the balances are and where the balances are needed within a chart first. And then I look at house placements of individual planets, and then I look at signs. One of the reasons for this is that aspects represent relationships between planets, and so the actual angle matters, the degrees matter, and the main thing is that regardless of the house system that you use and the style of astrology that you do, aspects remain the same across the board. Whereas everything else changes, you know. Well, let's say like this ascendant and whatever is like on the 28th degree, very late ascendant. If you move into a whole sign house system, everything changes. The ascendant moves over here, and unless you have like some 28 degree planets, every single planet is going to shift houses. So it's going to give you different information, right? And so what are you trying to do with the information? Are you trying to predict the future? Are you trying to just understand how you are right here, right now? Because Placidus and Porphyry quadrant house systems like that tend to explain things in the sky as they are, whereas a whole sign system, because it shifts things around, focuses on cusps. This is of utmost importance there. And that's important in prediction because what a cusp represents is like that. Your eyes, your perspective for the things of that house. So cusps will remain roughly the same when you switch from quadrant house to whole sign, but all your planets will probably shift, right? Because it's depending on which sign the ascendant is in, and that becomes the whole first house. And then the next sign becomes the whole second house, and so on and so forth. So what I see a cusp is representing is, or the cusp sign is the style or the lens in which you're seeing the things of that house. So if you have, let's use a sign we haven't talked about yet. Taurus. That actually worked out. Try. All right, so this isn't a mouth. This is
Okay, Groucho Marx.
yeah. Yeah. So, for somebody who has a Taurus cusp third house, they're looking at things of the third house through a Taurus perspective, even if they don't have any planets in the third house. What they're doing, especially if they don't have any planets in the third house, what they're doing is they're looking at things regarding communication and sibling relationships and information with a sort of grounded, conservative, factual lens. How it is that Taurus kind of evolves out of Aries, they take that same style of like saying, no, Aries is like too fast, too energetic. I want to take things slow. I want to make sure like everything's in its right place, and that we don't disturb the peace in the field that I'm grazing in. You know, I want like birds and bees, and I want a solid grounding, a solid foundation for the information that I'm gathering. And so they get caught up in building a foundation for information, right? But then you're not too concerned with, things like communication, like your style of communication, if you don't have any planets entering this third house. But it still gets ignited in transits when transits hit this. So as soon as a planet enters the sign of your cusp of a particular house, the things of that house become more clear or become ignited in the ways that that planet would indicate. So if Saturn enters Taurus, and in a whole sign house system, you have Taurus on the third house cusp, all kinds of third house issues are going to be coming up for you. Karmically, you're going to have a new perspective on how to structure and organize information in order to make it sustainable and useful, the things that Saturn is concerned with, but in the style of Taurus. So a lot of our most interesting insights and transits come whenever we have planets entering houses where we don't have any planets in our birth chart. But nevertheless, so it depends what you're trying to do. For transit type stuff, especially whole sign can be very good because it can give you an idea about how the different parts of your chart and parts of your psyche are going to be affected by different planetary events. But yeah, I like to think that Porphyry and Placidus, the quadrant house systems, tend to do a better job of just kind of laying out what it is that the person's about and how their set of perceptions are. And so if we want to look at a chart shape, if you have a lot of planets in this house and a lot of planets in that house, it's going to place a lot more emphasis on what I was talking about earlier with this balance. The person's going to have a natural inclination toward finding balance between extremes, and but at the expense of not paying attention to all the other areas of life that aren't being represented by having planets in those particular houses. So it can be a very tension-forming temperament to have a seesaw chart like that. A lot of planets in opposite signs, opposite houses. So that gives you a sense alone about the style of personality. It's like a balanced personality, but because they're trying to find balance between two extremes all the time, that can create some anxiety, but also some projection of competence and trust from other people, you know. If you have a splay chart, yeah, maybe a couple plants over here, everything's spread out a lot, and there's no, or a splash chart. A splay chart is one in which you have like maybe one or two conjunctions or, you know, concentrations of energy in random places, and then everything else is spread out. A splash chart has everything just all over the place. Generally, that's a person who's going to lack focus in one area, but they're going to prefer spreading themselves thin over multiple areas of life. And so that can also cause some anxiety in the sense that they don't know where to place their energy, you know, how to distribute their energy so that they get the best results in life. And also they'll have all these tensions pulling from all different directions, you know. I see a big splash chart where everything's every kind of place, and those tend to be the highest anxiety individuals. Unless they have, like, you know, a seesaw chart and then like a key planet, like the ruling planet in a place that's, you know, not connected to this, like if it's in the fourth house or something, and then you have stuff over here. There's really not a solid relationship between this and that stuff and this and that stuff. And if this is your ruling planet, you may feel kind of lost because the bulk of your energy is here, but your purpose is kind of here. Because your ruling planet has a lot to do with your purpose and the main things that you really should be placing your focus on in life, you know? Another chart, like if you have a lot of planets in this quadrant, yeah, just everything is concentrated in one place. You have a person who is very focused on, if it's the first quadrant, on themselves and on like those kind of first phases of life type things, like the self, like providing for yourself, you know, second house, third house, communicating and having that first experience of forming relationships with people, which usually comes through with siblings. That's why we lump, you know, communication. You learn to speak with your siblings, with your early childhood peers, with kids in the neighborhood, cousins, kids your age who are around, you know? And you learn a lot of concepts of life in that way through conflict with people your own age who you have to communicate. You're communicating on the same level, you know? Right. So that's why third house lumps together, you know, early childhood relationships and communication, because they are developed. Those things are developed at the same rate at the same exact times in life. And so if you have a lot of shit going on over here, you're gonna be like really kind of self-absorbed, you know, because the bottom half of the chart represents grounding and self, all the way from the actual self to work and chores and tasks in the sixth house. And then you have home grounding, the IC, obviously, is the cusp of home life and your role within the home. And so this is all sort of like behind closed doors kinds of things. And this is the more extroverted part of the chart. This is concerned with other people. And so left hemisphere is kind of concerned with the self, but this is the self-contained. This is the self in relation to the world, right? Midheaven, purpose, your public image, sense of belonging, 11th house, in your relationship to other people. 12th house, I'm not gonna talk about 12th house. I think I'm gonna do a talk on the 12th house by itself, some other time. And then right half of the chart is is more about other people. This is externals, this is internals, you, other people, or in relationships to other people. All right. I'll just write that down. Self, others. We'll say like outward and inward. So people who have like top heavy charts get a lot more attention from people, tend to be more outgoing, more extroverted. Bottom heavy, more concerned with, what lies at the bottom of, like at the top is about status. Depends on other people, your relationship to other people, with the public, what other people think, for that to even be determined. So you kind of form your identity around things at the top of the chart, because it's about outward facing things. Then inward facing things, home life, lies at the bottom of the chart. And so someone who has a bottom heavy chart is going to be more grounded in the home, or more concerned with those inward facing things, maybe more likely to work behind the scenes rather than in the visible public space, And so having balances or emphasis placed on these different areas, whether it's houses or quadrants or hemispheres, will give you a sense of the person's temperament. Dude, like right there. Okay. One other thing, I guess. Modalities and maybe I can skip drawing. My bad drawing. So modalities and elements. I like to stay away from describing the water and earth signs as feminine and the air and fire signs as masculine. Just based on how I've come to understand masculinity and femininity, and also the terms that I like to use, introversion and extroversion, to find that it's a little more accurate, psychologically speaking. If we're practicing Western astrology and we're trying to give good descriptions about how people are, that earth and water signs tend to be more introverted, and air and fire tends to be more extroverted. And not in the sense that like introverted being less social, more more shy or anything like that. Not extroverted being like liking people more, or less shy. I think those are misconceptions, but rather it's about where your energy is being placed and emphasized. And introverts tend to try to contain their energy, or find the right sort of expression for it that's not going to put out more energy than they're able to produce on their own. Whereas extroversion is more about expression out there. And we think of fire and air as things that kind of need a container for them to make sense. If fire doesn't have a container, a fire pit around it, you could start a forest fire, And so it needs a container in order to be useful rather than to be out of control, Air is all around, it's ether. Fire is led by the heart, and fire signs tend to be very action-oriented. Introverted signs like earth and water tend to kind of let things be as they are, and then their emphasis is more internal, And so air and fire both kind of like need a container for the introverted signs to like make sense of them, and then the extroverted signs look at the introverted signs and they're like, well, you need to act, you need to do something, We get caught up in maybe working behind closed doors and enjoying the comfort of our own space and whatnot, and we lack a bit of action. So statistically speaking, there's air and fire doesn't show up anymore in male charts than it does in female charts, and the converse is true as well of the other elements. So I like to stay away from those loaded terms, especially because they're being heavily distorted in our culture nowadays, So I want to try to, do my astrological practice with as much accuracy, psychological accuracy as possible, and changing of terms is sometimes important, Introversion and extroversion and masculine and feminine are all terms that get distorted, so that probably has its own place for a talk on its own, how to put those concepts to work in astrology. So, but to conclude, I think the birth chart is a very nice, incredible representation of our innate set of proclivities and predispositions for responding to certain kinds of events and certain kinds of circumstances in the world. And in my practice, I don't tell people what to do. I help them own what they do. I help them find their own paddle for navigating the river of life on their raft. So, yeah, that's my philosophy of astrology. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys.
Wonderful.
Cheers. Yeah, cheers. I figured I'd give away like what I've learned and what I've theorized about. I don't feel like I own the knowledge in itself, but also I just moved to a new town, so why not, But yeah, thanks guys. Nice to meet you all as well.
It's great to meet you too.
Cheers. Feel free to take a card if you want to stay in touch.